The Galactic Academy of Military History was the largest building Jake had ever seen. It stretched across 3 mountains on the planet Vexor 7, and its halls contained weapons and armor from 10,000 years of war across the stars. Every species in the Coalition sent their best students here to learn about the battles that had shaped the galaxy. Jake Thompson walked at the back of his class. He was 24 years old, with brown hair cut short in military style and calloused hands that told stories of hard work. He was the only human in this group of 37 students, and he felt every pair of alien eyes that turned his way. The Montari student next to him stood 8 feet tall, with a hard shell like a beetle and eyes that reflected light in strange patterns. The Rillian on his other side had blue skin and 4 arms, each one ending in delicate fingers. There were Vorthax with their stone-like bodies, Kelani with their feathered crests, and a dozen other species Jake was still learning to tell apart. Instructor Velox led the group through a wide corridor lined with glass cases. Velox was also Montari, but older, with chips and scratches on his shell that spoke of many years. His voice clicked and buzzed when he spoke, though the translator in Jake's ear made it sound like normal English. This hall contains weapons from the primitive era of each Coalition species, Velox explained. He walked slowly, giving students time to look at each display. The 4 energy weapons. Before projectile weapons. When our ancestors fought with simple tools made of stone, metal, and wood. Jake looked at the displays as they passed. He saw heavy clubs from the Vorthax homeworld, made of dense rock that must have weighed 50 pounds. He saw thin, needle-like blades from the Kelani, designed for their light bodies and quick movements. He saw curved swords from the Rillians, built with foregrips so all their hands could hold the weapon at once. Notice how different each species' weapons are, Velox continued. They reflect our bodies, our instincts, our ways of thinking. A Montari could never use a Kelani blade. A Rillian would find Vorthax weapons impossible to lift. Each species found its own path to violence. The class stopped before a large case at the end of the hall. A sign above it read, Terran Artifacts, Pre-Spaceflight Era. Jake felt his stomach tighten. This was Earth's display. His people's history, shown to aliens who knew nothing about where he came from. Inside the case lay a collection of human weapons. There were swords of different sizes, from short blades to long 2-handed ones. There were axes with wooden handles and metal heads. There were spears and polearms, hammers and maces. All of them looked old, with patches of rust and worn edges. Humans are the newest species to join the Coalition, Velox said. His tone was careful, the way people speak when they are trying to be polite about something unpleasant. They come from a Class 12 death world, which explains their unusual physical traits. Jake heard a few students shift uncomfortably. He knew what death world meant to them. It meant a planet where everything wanted to kill you. It meant a species that had evolved to survive impossible conditions. It meant dangerous. Their weapons show a typical primitive development, Velox went on. Stone to bronze to iron to steel. Nothing remarkable compared to other species. They simply discovered spaceflight before they had time to refine their combat technologies. Jake stepped closer to the glass. He looked at the long sword in the center of the display, with its straight blade and cross-shaped guard. He looked at the warhammer beside it, with its heavy head and long handle. He looked at the spear, the axe, the mace. Something was wrong. He couldn't explain it at first. It was like looking at a picture of his childhood home and realizing the windows were in the wrong places. Everything looked right at first glance, but the longer he stared, the more his brain screamed that something was off. Jake had grown up on a farm in Montana, in the middle of nowhere America. His grandfather, a man named Robert Thompson, had been a blacksmith as a hobby. Not for money. There wasn't much call for blacksmiths in the modern world. He did it because he loved it, because his father had taught him, and his father's father before that, going back generations. Jake had spent his childhood in his grandfather's workshop. He had learned to shape metal, to understand how weight and balance worked together to make a tool that felt alive in your hands. He had made his first knife at age 10, his first sword at 15. He had studied historical weapons, read books about ancient battles, practiced with replicas until the movements felt as natural as breathing. And now he looked at these weapons that were supposed to be from Earth, and he knew they were wrong. The longsword's balance was off. Way off. A real longsword had its balance point close to the guard, usually about 4 inches from the crosspiece. This let the wielder control the blade with small movements of the wrist. The sword in the case had its balance point nearly at the middle of the blade. It would feel clumsy, heavy, dead in the hand. The warhammer was wrong too. The head was too heavy on one side, which would make it twist during a swing. The handle was too thin for the weight it was supposed to support. No human smith would have made something so poorly designed. The spear was the worst. Its weight distribution said it was made for throwing, like a javelin. But its tip was shaped for thrusting combat, for holding a line against charging enemies. No one would make a spear that tried to be both things at once. It would fail at both jobs. Jake raised his hand. Instructor? Velox turned, his compound eyes reflecting the display lights. Yes, Private Thompson? These weapons, Jake said. He kept his voice calm, even though his heart was beating fast. Why are they balanced wrong? The corridor went silent. 36 alien students turned to look at the human. Instructor Velox's antenna twitched in a way Jake had learned meant surprise. I do not understand the question, Velox said slowly. Jake pointed through the glass. That longsword. The balance is wrong. And the hammer. And the spear. None of these weapons would work properly in a fight. He looked at Velox, then at the other students, then back at the display. Where did these actually come from? Because they didn't come from Earth. Not from any human smith who knew what they were doing. The silence stretched on. Jake saw Velox's shell go slightly pale, a sign of stress in Montari. He saw students exchanging glances, their translators buzzing with whispered comments. He had asked a question that wasn't supposed to be asked. And from the way everyone was looking at him, Jake realized that the answer might be something no one wanted him to find. Instructor Velox moved toward Jake with slow, careful steps. The Montari was nearly twice Jake's height, with arms that ended in sharp points. Most humans would have stepped back. Jake stood his ground. Private Thompson, Velox said. His translator gave his voice a cold, careful tone. These artifacts were collected from Earth during first contact. Coalition historians verified them. They have been studied by experts from 12 different species. Are you suggesting that all of these scholars were wrong? Jake looked at the weapons again. He thought about his grandfather's workshop, about the hours he had spent learning to feel the difference between a good blade and a bad one. He thought about how his grandfather had taught him that a weapon was like a handshake. You could tell everything about the person who made it just by holding what they had created. I'm not suggesting anything, Jake said. I'm telling you what I see. These weapons don't work. A human couldn't fight with them. Not well. Anyway, a sound came from behind him. Kira, the brilliant student with blue skin and 4 arms, had made a noise that her translator turned into a laugh. Perhaps humans simply don't understand their own history. Your species has only been in space for 18 years. You are practically children compared to the rest of us. Jake turned to face her. Kira was taller than him, and her 4 arms were crossed in a way that her species used to show superiority. Her feathered crest was raised high on her head. I grew up making these, Jake said simply. My grandfather taught me. His grandfather taught him. This knowledge has been passed down in my family for 6 generations. I've held real swords. I've made real axes. I know what human weapons feel like in human hands. He pointed at the display case. Those are not human weapons. Kira's crest lowered slightly. She had no answer for that. Velox's antennae were moving rapidly now, a sign of deep thought in his species. Jake had learned to read Montari body language during his first month at the academy. It had seemed important to understand the aliens he was living with. "Private Thompson," Velox said slowly, "if these weapons are not authentic, then what do you believe they are?" Jake hesitated. The question was dangerous. He could feel it in the air, in the way the other students had gone quiet, in the way Velox was watching him with all of his eyes. But he had already come this far. There was no point in stopping now. "I think someone made these to look like human weapons," Jake said. Someone who had seen pictures or descriptions, but had never actually held one. Never used one. They got the shapes mostly right, but they didn't understand how the weapons were supposed to work. He paused. "I think someone lied to your historians, and I want to know why." The silence that followed was heavy. Jake could hear his own heartbeat in his ears. He could hear the soft hum of the environmental systems and the distant footsteps of students in other parts of the building. Then Velox did something unexpected. He reached out with one of his pointed arms and entered a code into the panel beside the display case. The glass slid open. "Show us," Velox said. Jake stared at him. "Instructor? You make claims about these weapons. Demonstrate your knowledge. Show us what you mean." For a moment, Jake didn't move. He looked at the open case, at the weapons inside, at the 36 students watching him with expressions ranging from curiosity to hostility. This could be a trap. Velox might be setting him up to fail, to look foolish in front of the class. But Jake thought about his grandfather again, about the old man's rough hands and patient voice, about the way he had taught Jake to trust what he felt, not what others told him. Jake reached into the case and picked up the longsword. The wrongness hit him immediately. The blade wanted to tip forward, to dive toward the ground. He had to grip the handle tight just to keep it level. There was no life in it, no response to his movements. It was like holding a piece of dead metal. "Feel this," Jake said. He shifted into a basic guard position, the kind his grandfather had taught him when he was 12 years old. The sword wobbled, fighting against him. A real longsword responds to you. You think about moving, and it moves. The balance makes it feel light, even though it weighs 3 pounds. This thing feels like it weighs 10. He demonstrated a simple cut, a diagonal slash from shoulder to hip. The blade lagged behind his hands, then overcorrected, pulling him off balance. A few students made sounds of interest. "A beginner with a real sword could beat an expert with this one," Jake said. "It doesn't work with your body. It works against it." He set the longsword down and picked up the warhammer. The wrongness was even more obvious here. The head twisted in his grip, trying to spin off to one side. The handle bent under the uneven weight. "This would break after 3 swings," Jake said. "Maybe less. The stress points are all wrong. And look at this." He pointed to the grip. The handle shape. It's not made for human hands. A human has 4 fingers and a thumb, all on one side of the hand. This grip is designed for something with fingers on both sides. 3 on each, maybe. He looked at Velox. The Montari shell had gone very pale now. His antenna had stopped moving entirely. "Instructor," Jake said quietly. "Who really made these weapons?" Velox did not answer. He was staring at the warhammer in Jake's hands with an expression that even the translator couldn't hide. It was fear. "Private Thompson." A new voice came from the doorway of the hall. Every head turned. Admiral Grace stood at the entrance. She was human, 60 years old, with gray hair pulled back in a tight bun and a face that looked like it had been carved from stone. Her coalition dress uniform was covered in medals and ribbons that Jake didn't recognize. Behind her stood two armed soldiers in black armor. Jake had never met Admiral Grace. He knew of her. Everyone did. She was the highest-ranking human in the coalition military, one of the first humans to ever leave Earth, a legend among his people. What was she doing here? "Put the weapon down," Admiral Grace said. Her voice was calm but firm. "Class is dismissed. All students will return to their quarters immediately." She paused, her eyes finding Jake's. "Except for you, Private Thompson. You're coming with me." Jake set the warhammer back in the case. Around him, students were moving toward the exits, their conversations buzzing with confused questions. Kira looked back at him once, her expression unreadable, before she disappeared through a side door. Velox started to say something, but Admiral Grace cut him off with a raised hand. "We'll speak later, Instructor. For now, I need to have a conversation with Private Thompson." She looked at Jake again, and for just a moment, he saw something strange in her eyes. Pride, satisfaction, like he had passed a test he didn't know he was taking. "Come with me," she said. "It's time you learned the truth about what happened when humanity met the stars." Jake followed her out of the hall. The two guards fell into step behind him. As they walked through the academy's corridors, Jake realized that his life had just changed forever. He just didn't know yet whether it had changed for better or for worse. Admiral Grace led Jake through corridors he had never seen before. They went deeper into the academy, past the classrooms and training halls, past the living quarters and dining areas, until they reached a part of the building that didn't appear on any map. The walls changed from polished metal to rough stone. The lights grew dimmer. Jake counted 7 security checkpoints, each one requiring Grace to enter codes and submit to scans. The guards behind them stayed silent, their boots echoing on the floor. Finally, they stopped before a massive door made of something that looked like solid black glass. There was no handle, no visible lock. Just a small symbol carved into the surface, a circle with a line through it, surrounded by 12 smaller circles. "What you noticed in 3 minutes," Grace said. Not turning to look at him, took Coalition intelligence 40 years to figure out, and another 30 years to bury so deep that most people forgot it ever happened. Jake felt cold. "What do you mean?" Grace placed her palm against the black glass. Light scanned across her hand, then her face, then her entire body. The door made a sound like a giant taking a breath, and then it slowly swung open. The room beyond was larger than Jake expected. It was filled with display cases, racks, and stands, all holding weapons. But these were different from the ones upstairs. Even from the doorway, Jake could feel it. These weapons were real. He stepped inside, his eyes moving from case to case. There were swords of every kind, long swords, short swords, curved blades, straight blades. There were axes with heads that gleamed even in the low light. There were spears with tips that looked sharp enough to cut the air itself. Hammers, maces, flails, daggers, polearms, hundreds of weapons, maybe thousands, filling the room from floor to ceiling. Jake walked to the nearest display and lifted a sword. It was a European longsword, the kind his grandfather had loved most. The moment his hand closed around the grip, he felt the difference. The balance was perfect. The edge was true. The weight settled into his palm like a friend returning home. "This is real," he whispered. "This is the real thing." "Every weapon in this room was made by human hands," Grace said. She had followed him inside, leaving the guards at the door. Most of them were collected from Earth over the past 2 centuries. Some are older. A few are new, made by people who still keep the old knowledge alive. Jake set the long sword down and moved to another case. Inside was a katana, a Japanese sword with a curved blade and a long handle wrapped in ray skin and silk cord. He picked it up, drew it from its sheath, and felt the perfection of 10,000 folded layers of steel. Why? Jake asked. Why keep these hidden? Why show the fake ones upstairs instead of the real things? Grace picked up a weapon of her own, a Chinese dao, a single-edged sword with a curved blade and a ring at the end of the handle. She held it like someone who had trained with it for years, which Jake realized was probably true. Before first contact, Grace said, the Coalition sent observation teams to Earth. This is standard procedure for any new species. They watch from orbit, study our behavior, decide whether we're ready to join galactic civilization. She moved the dao through a slow pattern, each motion precise and controlled. Jake recognized the form. It was a basic training exercise that students practiced thousands of times to build muscle memory. They observed humans for 50 years, Grace continued. They saw our wars, our violence, our endless capacity for destruction. They expected this. Every species has a violent past. What they didn't expect was what we did with our violence. What do you mean? Grace stopped moving. She looked at Jake with eyes that held depths he couldn't measure. Every other species in the Coalition developed ranged weapons and then abandoned close combat entirely. Why would you fight with a sword when you can shoot from a distance? It's inefficient, dangerous, primitive. She paused. But humans never stopped. Even after we invented guns, we kept making swords. Even after we invented missiles, we kept practicing martial arts. In the 21st century, there were more people studying historical swordplay than at any other time in human history. Jake thought about his grandfather's workshop, about the martial arts schools on every street corner, about the Olympic fencing teams and the historical European martial arts clubs and the kendo dojos that existed all over Earth. We didn't forget, he said. Slowly, we never forgot. Grace returned the dao to its case. And that scared them. The Coalition, I mean. They looked at humanity and saw a species that had mastered every form of violence ever invented. And instead of leaving the old ways behind, we preserved them, perfected them. Passed them down from generation to generation like sacred treasures. She walked to the center of the room, where a large holographic display showed a map of the galaxy. Thousands of star systems, hundreds of species, all connected by trade routes and military alliances. The Coalition decided that humanity was too dangerous to show the truth about. So when they collected artifacts from Earth, they didn't take real weapons. They had their own smiths create fake weapons that looked human, but didn't work like human weapons. Weapons that made us seem clumsy, primitive, no threat to anyone. Jake felt anger rising in his chest. They lied about us. They were afraid of us. Grace turned to face him. And in a way, they were right to be afraid. Do you know what humans are, Private Thompson? We're the only species in the Coalition that trains its children to fight. Not soldiers' children. Martial arts classes for 5-year-olds. Wrestling teams in schools. Boxing clubs in every city. She smiled, but there was no warmth in it. We teach our young to be warriors before they can even read. Jake thought about his own childhood. About the wrestling matches in the barn with his brothers. About the boxing lessons his father had given him. About the knife work his grandfather had taught him, always with the warning that this knowledge was for defense only. Why are you telling me this? Jake asked. Why now? Grace was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was softer. Because the galaxy is changing, Jake. There are threats coming that the Coalition doesn't want to admit exist. Species that don't play by the rules of polite civilization. Enemies that can't be reasoned with or negotiated with or scared away with big guns. She walked to a weapon rack and pulled down a training sword blunted. Safe for practice, but balanced exactly like the real thing. The Coalition has spent 70 years pretending that humans are harmless, that our violent past is just an embarrassing footnote in our history. She tossed the training sword to Jake, who caught it without thinking. But some of us remember the truth, and we've been waiting for the right moment to remind the galaxy what humanity is really capable of. Jake looked at the sword in his hand. It felt natural there. Right, like it had always belonged. "What do you want from me?" he asked. Admiral Gray smiled. This time, there was warmth in it and something else. Hope. "I want you to help me show them," she said. "When the time comes, I want you to help humanity remember who we really are." 3 months passed after Jake's visit to the hidden vault. He returned to his classes, finished his training, and received his assignment to the Coalition patrol ship named Vigilant Hope. He did not speak about what Admiral Grace had shown him. He did not tell anyone about the real weapons hidden beneath the academy, but he thought about it every day. The Vigilant Hope was a medium-sized cruiser with a crew of 300. Jake was one of 8 humans on board, a small number compared to the Mentari and Rillians who made up most of the crew. His job was simple: security patrol, watching for trouble, responding to emergencies. It was boring work, but it gave him time to think and time to train. Every night, after his shift ended, Jake went to the small cargo bay that the human crew had claimed as their own. There, using equipment they had brought from Earth, they practiced. They drilled with training swords. They sparred with padded gloves. They worked through forms and patterns that their families had taught them, traditions that stretched back hundreds or thousands of years. The other humans on the ship came from different backgrounds. There was Maria, a woman from Texas who had studied Japanese sword arts since childhood. There was David, a big man from New York who specialized in wrestling and close-quarters combat. There was Emma, quiet and deadly, who had grown up in a family of knife makers and knew more about blades than anyone Jake had ever met. None of them had visited the hidden vault, but all of them knew, in their bones, what humanity really was. "Something's coming," David said one night after a hard sparring session. He was sitting on a crate, wiping sweat from his face. "I can feel it. The way the officers have been acting. The extra security drills. Something's wrong." Jake nodded. He had noticed it too. The Mentari captain had seemed nervous for weeks. There were more messages marked classified than usual. The ship had changed course 3 times in the past month, always heading toward the outer colonies. "I heard a rumor," Maria said. She was practicing cuts with her wooden training sword, her movements smooth and precise. "About the Zirathi." Everyone went quiet. The Zirathi were a legend in the Coalition, and not a good one. They were a species from beyond the mapped regions of the galaxy, 8-limbed predators who lived for conquest. For 100 years, they had been quiet, staying in their own territory. But rumors had been spreading that they were on the move again. "They're real," Emma said. She was sharpening a small knife, her eyes focused on the blade. "My cousin works in intelligence. She said the Zirathi have been massing forces near the border. Hundreds of ships. Maybe thousands." Jake felt a chill run down his spine. He remembered what Admiral Grace had told him about threats that couldn't be reasoned with, about enemies that didn't follow the rules. "The Coalition fleet has better weapons," David said, but he didn't sound confident. "Better ships. We can hit them from a distance, keep them from ever getting close." Maria shook her head. "The Zirathi don't fight like that. They don't care about space battles. They get close, dock with your ship, break through the hull, and fight you face to face." She stopped her practice and looked at the others. "That's what they're famous for. Ship-to-ship boarding. Close combat. The thing the Coalition is worst at. Silence filled the cargo bay. Jake thought about the weapons in that hidden vault, about the long swords and katanas and axes that had been hidden from the galaxy, about the truth that the Coalition had worked so hard to bury. If the Zirathi come, Jake said slowly, the Coalition is going to need something they don't have. What's that? David asked. Before Jake could answer, the ship's alarms began to sound. Red lights flashed across the walls. A voice came over the speakers. The captain, speaking in rapid clicks that Jake's translator turned into urgent English. All hands to battle stations. This is not a drill. We have detected Zirathi vessels on approach. All hands to battle stations. The four humans looked at each other. For a moment, no one moved. Then Jake stood up. He walked to his locker and pulled out the sword his grandfather had given him before he left Earth. It was a simple blade, not fancy or decorated, but it had been in his family for 4 generations. It was balanced perfectly, and its edge could cut through steel. Get your weapons, Jake said. Real ones. The ones we're not supposed to have. Maria grinned. She reached into her own locker and pulled out a katana in a black sheath. David produced a pair of brass knuckles and a short fighting knife. Emma had 3 knives hidden on her body before Jake even finished speaking. What are we doing? David asked. His voice was excited, not scared. The Coalition thinks humans can't fight up close, Jake said. He felt something changing inside him, a switch being flipped. A door opening that had been closed for too long. The Zirathi are about to learn how wrong they are. They moved through the ship's corridors, ignoring the orders to go to defensive positions. Other crew members stared at them as they passed aliens who had never seen humans carrying weapons like these. Jake heard whispers, saw pointing fingers, felt the weight of centuries of lies pressing down on him, but he didn't stop. He couldn't stop. Because somewhere in the back of his mind, he heard his grandfather's voice, teaching him the first lesson of the blade. A warrior doesn't fight because he wants to, the old man had said. He fights because someone has to, because the people around him can't, because if he doesn't stand up, no one will. The ship shook as the first Zirathi vessel made contact with the hull. Jake heard the screech of metal on metal, the hiss of atmosphere escaping through new holes. Screams echoed through the corridor's alien screams, the sounds of people who had never learned to fight for their lives. Jake gripped his sword tighter. Beside him, Maria, David, and Emma fell into formation without needing to be told. Remember, Jake said as they moved toward the breach. They expect us to be weak. They expect us to run and hide and die like all the others. He smiled. It was not a nice smile. Let's show them what humans really are. They came through the breach in the hull like water through a broken dam 8-limbed. Creatures covered in black armor made of their own hardened skin. Their eyes were red and hungry. Their mouths were filled with teeth designed for tearing flesh. Each one carried blades attached to their 4 upper arms, weapons that moved independently like the limbs of a spider. The first wave hit the Coalition defenders and scattered them like leaves in a storm. Jake watched a Mantari security officer try to fight back with an energy pistol. The Zirathi was on him before he could fire twice, blades cutting through his shell like it was paper. The aliens died. They died screaming, died running, died begging for mercy that would never come. The Zirathi moved through the corridors with terrible efficiency, killing everything in their path. Then they reached the humans. Jake moved without thinking. Years of training took over his body, guiding his arms and legs through patterns he had practiced 10,000 times. His sword caught the first Zirathi mid-charge, sliding between the gaps in its armor and opening a wound from shoulder to hip. The creature screamed, a high, piercing sound that hurt Jake's ears and fell. Beside him, Maria's katana sang through the air. She fought like a dancer, each movement flowing into the next, her blade always where it needed to be. 2 Zirathi rushed her at once. She killed them both with a single spinning cut that took their heads in a fountain of black blood. David fought differently. No grace, no beauty, just raw power and determination. He caught a Zirathi by 2 of its arms, twisted, and threw the creature into a wall hard enough to crack its armor. Before it could recover, his knife found the soft spot under its jaw. Emma was invisible. She moved through the battle like a ghost, appearing behind enemies, her knives finding throats and eyes and joints with surgical precision. Jake lost count of how many she killed. The Zirathi hesitated. For the first time in their invasion, they had found something they didn't expect. Something that fought back. Something that wasn't afraid. Push them back. Jake shouted. Don't let them regroup. The 4 humans charged. It was madness, 4 against dozens. But the Zirathi were already off balance, already confused by these strange pink creatures who fought like nothing they had ever seen. The humans hit them like a hammer hitting glass. More Coalition crew members appeared behind them. Aliens who had been running away, who had been hiding, who had given up hope. They saw the humans fighting. They saw the Zirathi falling. And something changed in their eyes. A Montari officer picked up a piece of broken metal and joined the fight. Then a Rillian technician. Then a dozen others, armed with whatever they could find. The tide turned. The Zirathi retreated to the breach, dragging their wounded with them. Jake and his team followed, giving them no rest, no chance to regroup. The last Zirathi through the hole in the hull looked back at Jake with something in its red eyes that might have been fear. Then it was gone, and the breach sealed behind them, and the battle was over. Jake stood in the corridor, surrounded by bodies and blood and the sounds of people crying in relief. His sword was covered in black gore. His arms were shaking with exhaustion. But he was alive. They were all alive. The news spread across the Coalition like fire through dry grass. The Vigilant Hope had survived a Zirathi boarding action, the first ship in 50 years to do so. And not just survived, but fought back. Driven the invaders away. Won. And it was humans who had done it. 3 weeks later, Jake stood before the Coalition Security Council on the capital world of Vexor Prime. The chamber was enormous, filled with representatives from 47 species. Every eye in the room was on him. Admiral Grace sat in the human delegation section, her face carefully blank. But Jake could see the pride in her eyes. The Zirathi have been raiding the outer colonies for 3 months, the Council Prime announced. His voice echoed through the chamber, translated into 100 languages. Our losses have been catastrophic. Traditional defense strategies have failed. We face extinction at the hands of an enemy we cannot stop. He paused, his ancient face heavy with despair. Private Thompson, you led the defense of the Vigilant Hope. You defeated the Zirathi in close combat, something our military experts believed to be impossible. We have seen the footage. We have studied your techniques. The Council Prime leaned forward. How did you do it? Jake looked around the chamber. He saw the fear in their eyes, the desperate hope, the willingness to believe in anything that might save them. You lied about us, Jake said. His voice was calm but carried to every corner of the room. For 70 years, you told the galaxy that humans were primitive, clumsy, that our weapons didn't work and our fighting techniques were worthless. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. The Council Prime's face tightened. The weapons in your museums are fake, Jake continued, made by people who didn't understand what they were copying. You did this because you were afraid of us, because you saw what we really are, and it scared you. He reached down and drew his grandfather's sword. Guards moved toward him, but Admiral Grace raised a hand and they stopped. Humanity never forgot how to fight, Jake said. We never stopped practicing. Every generation, we passed down the knowledge, how to hold a blade, how to move in combat, how to face an enemy and come out alive. He held up the sword, letting the light catch the ancient steel. "This weapon has been in my family for 4 generations. It works perfectly. It always has." The chamber was silent. Jake looked at the Council Prime. "You have enemies you cannot defeat with guns and missiles. Enemies who get close and kill you with blades. Enemies who have never faced a species that fights back." Jake smiled, the same warrior smile his grandfather had taught him. "Humanity requests permission to deploy our specialized combat units against the Zerathi threat. How many?" the Council Prime asked. His voice was barely a whisper. Jake thought about Earth. About 8 billion people who had grown up learning to fight. About martial arts schools on every corner and blacksmith shops in every town. About a species that had never stopped being warriors, no matter how many lies were told about them. "Enough," he said. "We have enough." The war lasted 2 years. Human combat units deployed to every front line, teaching allies and fighting enemies with weapons the galaxy had forgotten existed. The Zerathi, who had never lost a boarding action in their history, learned to fear the sound of human voices in their ships. When it was over, when the last Zerathi fleet retreated to its home territory, the Coalition gathered to celebrate. And in the rebuilt ancient weapons hall of the Galactic Academy, new displays were installed. Real weapons this time. Real history. No more lies. Jake visited the hall on the anniversary of the victory. He walked past display cases filled with swords and axes and polearms that balanced perfectly in human hands. Students from a dozen species followed behind him, asking questions about techniques and traditions that their own cultures had lost. Thousands of years ago, at the center of the hall stood a new monument. A simple plaque, carved from black stone, with words that had been chosen by Admiral Grace herself. Jake read them out loud, his voice steady and proud. "Never mistake restraint for weakness or patience for ignorance. Humanity remembered. Humanity always remembers." He touched the hilt of the sword at his hip, his grandfather's sword, which would someday pass to his own children, and smiled. The galaxy knew the truth now, and they would never forget again.